And we're live. Hi, I'm here with Sam Zawadzki, or Sam Zawadzki, however you want to pronounce it.
That's how I want it pronounced.
That's how you want it pronounced. We're here to talk about learning as an entrepreneur, as a tech entrepreneur. I'm not so much a tech entrepreneur, but I am an entrepreneur, and I am fascinated with learning and development. Sam and I have become friends over the last couple of months, and one of the things we've been bonding over is the book Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, and that's something that we're going to talk a little bit about. But first of all, Sam, just tell the people who are watching right now what you think about learning and development and how important it is as an entrepreneur, and well, just as a person generally, but particularly in the entrepreneur or on tech entrepreneur space.
I think that when you are in business, you will come up against a multitude of problems and challenges. It may be your first time encountering them, but it won't be someone else's first time encountering those problems. There's nearly everything that you come up against. There's probably an answer out there for it somewhere. So if you are starting to read around some of your challenges, a lot of what I read is sales and marketing, and a lot of that is psychology based or psychology focused. It will really help you in the practical day-to-day running of your business, where you can go, oh, it's that exact principle that is in play here, and this is how I can solve that. And you don't have to redo all the psychology and learn it all yourself. You can get a real leg up. So I think it's vitally important.
And clearly, for some people, the idea of learning, or just the thought of learning, or just the word learning, implies classrooms and schools. That doesn't really apply, does it? What could you just explain to some of the people out there some of the ways that you can learn and achieve learning and development benefits?
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of spoiled these days. There's so many different, be it short YouTube videos, webinars, learning platforms, any medium that you want to engage in, you can, and it can be very flexible about how and when you have time. One of my favorite ways to learn has been through Udemy, which is an online website where you can buy courses. My favorite course that I bought was by a behavioral economist, Dan Ariely, who I just thought was incredible, and I highly recommend it. It's absolutely brilliant. Possible options.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right, and it doesn't matter what field of business that you're in, whether you're in property or you're in tech, or if you're in engineering, there's always going to be something that you can learn and develop. And ultimately, what's that going to translate to? That's going to translate to more sales, better customer service, better innovation, faster innovation, whatever you're looking to achieve. Anything that can give you that extra 1%, that extra 1% compounded over 3, 4, 5 years, that can actually start to add up. And I've actually just finished a book called The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. It's a very interesting book. You've read it, have you?
Yeah.
Okay, great. And really what that talks about is how very small changes that you make to your life can add up to really big differences over the course of time. A very simple analogy I can put into that is let's say you cut out that bag of crisps that you have every day, let's call it 200 calories. Well, after 17 days, that's 3,500 calories less that you would have, 3,400 calories less that you would have had. That translates to about a pound of fat. So imagine if you're doing that consistently over a year. I'm not saying necessarily you're going to wither away, but ultimately you can see that if you make these very small changes, they can add up to very big differences.
There's also the swing of, if you replace that, I'm going to sit and have my microwave meal and watch my favourite Netflix show with, I'm going to nip to the gym. Not only are you removing the negative behaviour and the compound effect of that over a year, you're adding in a positive behaviour which is going to have a positive compound effect. So a lot of that book is about feedback loops and spirals, and how you can put yourself into a positive life spiral or a negative life spiral. And I think that taking the time to read or educate yourself online and webinars, audiobooks, is one of those keystone habits that will be a very positive cycle.
Yeah, or just making that extra phone sales call every day, or making that extra customer service call, or just putting in that extra 5 or 10 minutes every day to develop a product or develop your business plan or whatever it is. It all adds up. You're working 220 to 250 days a year. You've got a lot of opportunity there to increase your productivity in that field. So let's talk about thinking fast and slow. And in a moment, I think we'll try and pop out and show people what that book looks like. Maybe if you've got the cover on your phone, we can show people what it looks like. But it's not the most sexy book cover you've ever seen, but it's that's not really what it's all about. So, Thinking Fast and Slow is a book that's written by Daniel Kahneman, and Daniel Kahneman's won the Nobel Prize previously, and he and his collaborator Amos Tversky, over the course of 30 to 40 years, have done a huge amount of research into human psychology. I sort of don't want to call him a psychologist, because he's sort of, would you call him a behavioural economist? Or is he an economist or a psychologist? Or maybe he's a bit of both. What do you think?
He's like a neural researcher.
Maybe that's a better way of describing him. But I think that maybe scares people off.
He's definitely a scientist. Everything that he's doing is very methodical in its rigor and study, and he does a great job of translating what could be quite bland scientific experiments into really digestible and understandable real world examples.
Yeah. One of the things that I liked. I liked the examples that he gave was when he knows that the probability of being involved in a terrorist incident in Jerusalem, where he was living at the time, was very low. I don't think he was living there. I think he was visiting visiting some friends. He lived in Taunton in Israel for a long time. And he was in his hire car, and he pulled up alongside the bus, and he said subconsciously he was realising that he was pulling away from the bus at the traffic lights much quicker than he would otherwise have done if he was, say, back in the States where he was living. And it was really down to his subconscious mind, his system one, making the association with making a sort of negative association with buses in Israel as being dangerous. And there were so many different examples that they come up with, but the whole point of the book is what your mind thinks, or how you perceive things, isn't really how things truly are. And there's a concept that he talks about, which is what you see is all there is, which is in your mind what you see is psychologically all you think there is. It's kind of why in our field, in the finance space, the brokers that we speak to, we have to speak to brokers regularly, because if you're not in front of them, out of sight, out of mind. I think if you're a property developer, for example, if you're not in front of the agents or land brokers that you want to be getting sites from on a regular basis, if you're not calling them all the time, if you're not going to see them for coffee, for dinner, for lunch, again, has the same impact. That if you're not in front of them, if they don't see you, then they're not going to send you the things that you want. So from a very practical perspective, I think that makes a big difference. But why don't you talk about some of your key takeaways from the book?
So I sort of imagine the book is, if it was your first time ever opening up a computer and you needed to figure out how the computer worked and what it could do and what was all happening there, is the equivalent of a guide for your mind, or maybe the human mind. It's sort of saying, you might not have thought about how you think before because it's something you've done all your life since you were born and breathing, but actually we've gone down and we've diagnosed exactly how you think, the processes of how you think, the inputs of data that you put in, the outputs that you expect, and we've analysed it, and we've found some really interesting areas where there's massive errors. And for me, that was where it was most interesting, was taking the way that we think, where we all think we're very logical and very rational, and we expect that we behave that way, and looking at examples where we don't. Some of the ones that I thought were really interesting, some of the subjects covered were priming, anchoring, and the one that really I spent a long time thinking about was regression to the mean.
Yeah, that's actually something that we've been thinking about a lot recently as well.
In terms of which ones do you want to go into sort of first? Just go any random.
Well, I actually like to talk about regression to the mean, because it's something that for even the most lay person, you can really associate with. They talk about the golfer analogy, which was really good. I think if you're
I like the fighter pilot.
The fighter pilot one was very good, of course. Yeah, and when he talked about his IDF experience, it was probably one of the most interesting parts of the book. You'll have to read that to get that insight. But I think if you're a football fan, let's say you're the fan of a team that maybe yo-yos between the Premier League and the Championship, you'll be familiar with the concept of second season syndrome. And often what you'll see is teams will be promoted to the Premier League from the Championship and have an absolute standout year, and then the following year they'll play like absolute drains and get relegated by the end of March. And I think it's a lot of that is a concept of regression to the mean. And like you could, for example, use the example of Leicester City. Leicester City. They beat, they were exceptional 2 seasons ago, and won the Premier League when no one expected it, having been, just narrowly escaped relegation. They win the Premier League, and then the following season they're back down the bottom of the league. I think ultimately last season we saw what you could definitely describe as regression to the mean as far as Leicester City were concerned. So and I think right now I think. You're seeing Leicester where they should be, which is sort of lower mid-table. It's a reflection of where they are as a club, and that's really what regression to the mean is. So you'll outperform, and then you'll massively underperform, and then probably after that you'll go back to your average level. It's something that I've seen with our businesses. We typically do have these sort of standout breakout years, and then you expect that you're going to conquer the universe in 2 years' time, and actually things turn out to be a little bit more difficult than you realise.
Having learned about regression to the mean, has anything changed in how you'll run your business? Have there been any, from that specific sort of understanding, have you said, we're going to change this business process, or we're going to do this differently? What's been any tangible?
I think the thing about regression to the mean and the applications I'm going to make going forwards are targeting or business planning and targeting are going to change completely. So I think whatever you think you can do realistically, but with an optimistic hat on, is not going to happen, because nothing ever happens with the velocity that you think it's going to happen. So I talked to some tech founders who are looking to take investment from our family, and they start talking to me about sales velocity. So they're saying, one of whom was saying, oh yeah, well we're going to have the same number of sales as the leading traditional supplier to the market in 5 years' time, and I think maybe 3 months ago I would have said okay, yeah, sure, I could see that's possible. Now I look at it and go, look, I want to see your numbers based on the fact that you're probably going to do less than half of that, and that's something that we're going to carry forward into our business as well. So our month-to-month business planning, our annual business planning, whatever, because you see it bear fruit. You see that, I'm going to forecast that we're going to close out £10 million worth of loans this month, and then you find that we're doing half of that, and you think, right, well, okay, well, and there's a consistent theme there. And so actually your business planning should be done on what you've done in the past and what's consistent. And if you're going to incorporate growth, that growth needs to be very gradual. You can't assume anything particularly aggressive.
Completely agree. One of the big takeaways from me about our business process that will change because of regression to the mean is around hiring people. So we've got quite a lot of new clients coming onto our software, and we need to expand our sales team. We also need to expand our developer team. One of the big challenges for any company is hiring. It's a complicated and long process. And regression to the mean states that you might have someone who comes in and does a really good interview, but they're just being lucky, and actually if you interviewed them 3 times, you'd find the base quality of their interview, the mean, is a lot worse. But conversely, you might have someone who comes in who interviews terribly because the first interview they're really worried about, or it's a bad day, or unlucky, or all the factors. But if you interviewed them multiple times, regression to the mean, you'd find out more of what their baseline is. So for us, I think it's frustrating because you just want to hire as quickly as you can. You don't want to spend a lot of time on it. But actually saying, no, we're going to interview someone at least 3 times, and it's almost the concept of 3 first-round interviews. Each interview is the same interview, just to get a baseline average of what that person's actually like, is going to be one of our big takeaways from it.
Actually, on that point, unrelated to thinking fast and slow, you want to talk to a guy called Olivier Vidal, who has something called the Fair Hiring Project, and what the Fair Hiring Project looks to do is it provides employers with the ability to look past people who might interview well, but actually don't necessarily have the skills, and so
which is so difficult in sales.
And I think one of the things, and I think that's right. I mean, we've previously had experiences with hires that have, let's say, performed very well at interview, and actually the reality of their performance has been hasn't lived up to expectations, and for one reason or another. And so, I mean, it's a very interesting analogy. I hadn't really thought of it from the hiring perspective. I think it's something obviously that applies across the board, but from the hiring perspective, I think it does very much apply to everything.
One of the other ones that I thought was particularly interesting that I could see an application in our business, I've not necessarily worked out how we'll translate it into software as a service sale to estate agents, was the story of anchoring. And anchoring you can read up about online, but there's lots of different applications of anchoring, but for me it was the urgency anchoring. So this story was a supermarket took cans of soup and had a big display to sell the cans of soup, and they tracked the average basket size. The average basket size was 3 cans of soup. They then put a big sign up saying maximum number of cans of soup that you can buy are 12. There's a limit of 12 cans of soup per customer. And all of a sudden, the customer's mind was reset to a higher anchor of how much soup they needed, in the context of there's a limit. So there also creates urgency that, well, if I can only get 12, how many do I want to get? So the exact same consumers, the exact same cans of soup, nothing changed other than the sign. The average basket size went up to 7. So this is where I think the application of understanding psychology in sales can be massively, massively valuable. You might have an incredible startup and you just need that 1 degree, that one tiny tweak to move your basket size from 3 to 7 in order to be successful. And it's figuring out where you can make these optimizations in your processes that I think can have incredible value.
And I guess if you're an estate agent or a realtor and you're looking to sell something, you can apply that as well. You could say, let's say you've got a vendor who's perhaps a little bit aspirational with their sales price that they've listed, but you could say, look, you could say, well, look, I think the absolute best that I can get here is the asking price minus 10,000 or something like that. There are ways that you can make that work, and I think it applies to our business, and I think it applies to all business. Anyone who's in a sales mindset, or even actually, I think even if if you're not internally focused within a business, I think that you can still apply that. If you're an engineer and your boss says to you, I want you to, I need that project delivered by X date, you can say, actually, I can, look, the absolute best I can get is X date plus 5 days or something like that. And then even if you actually probably could hit, date X, or maybe 1 or 2 days over, and then you've given yourself breathing room. And even better, you're then under-promising, and you even give yourself a chance to over-deliver. And we all know that people who under-promise and over-deliver tend to win, particularly in the corporate game.
I think that's a great example of these principles, these psychology principles that you learn in this book are applicable to so many different areas. It may be to deal negotiation around a salary for yourself or for a new employee. It may be around the sale of a house. Or it could be around expectation management of a project. Anchoring is, I guess, almost a law that can be applied everywhere throughout your life. And understanding these principles will give you a lot more power in all of the different areas of communication that you have to do with any stakeholder.
it's quite funny. I had a consultant come in to see me yesterday, and as we finished it was very clever, because it was very clever, but also actually we can touch on something else, because he may have actually ruined the meeting, and we'll get onto that in a second. It was clever because he said, I like this, you don't have to pay it, but I want to retain. I was thinking it might be helpful for me to have a retainer, and the figure I was thinking of was massive stretch target, very large figure. And so in our minds now, in my mind now, I'm thinking, well, whatever the figure I would have given him, whatever I suggested to him now, it's going to appear very rude. So I now have to go well above a figure that I feel comfortable with, because I'm concerned that he's going to take umbrage and be offended by the number that I suggest. So it's very interesting. I mean, I actually didn't even think about it, how he was anchoring it last night. But yeah, for sure, he totally was anchoring me, and yeah. But we're now touch on to the next thing, which is, when you go and have a really nice meal, and you have it's a fantastic experience, and then the waiter brings the bill, and they've added something onto the bill that you didn't order. And all of a sudden, that meal for you is tarnished because the restaurant had the temerity to charge you for something that you didn't actually order or ask for or receive. And that is what's that concept called? What's that concept called? I thought that was anchoring. Anyway, this is one of the things that the book touches on, which is you've had no matter how good your experience is, if there's a negative element to that experience, that's the thing you remember most. And it's so much, as someone said to me many years ago, and it's always rung true, perception is so much more important than reality, and how you're perceived, or how an experience is perceived, is actually so much more important than how it actually was.
I think that's a really great point, and once again it can come back to business very, very nicely. Many people, I think, negotiate and run businesses based on the emotional level of how they feel an experience was or how it is, and they don't think about purely the commercial level. Far too many people, for the sake of pride and ego, will lose out on deals that would have been good for them commercially just because they feel the need to win or they feel the need to be best. And being able to understand how your mind thinks and decouple those two things and say, do you know what, the people that were doing this deal weren't particularly great, but the commercials are really, really good. And actually, if I look at this purely from an analytical lens and remove the emotional aspects, it is a good deal. Or probably more often the converse, which is, wow, do you know what, that consultant was really slick, I really liked him, there was a lot of rapport, we got on great, I really want to work with him. But then if you look at the commercial deliverables and remove the emotion from the equation, is it still a good deal? So being able to understand how your own brain thinks and the biases that you pull in from the emotional experiences can also be incredibly useful in the business context.
Yeah. As someone once said to me, it's... people don't think about what you told them, they think about how you've made them feel. And that applies not just from a sales context, but also in terms of upwards and downwards management as well, internally, and also just in life generally. And sometimes how you deliver a message to people is more important than what you're actually saying to them. So it's definitely something to bear in mind, and it's very much a huge part of the last couple of chapters in the book.
One of the layers I really enjoyed that I thought is quite difficult to convey, but quite important, is the risks associated with small sample sizes.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how best to explain that, but probably if you're making business decisions, you want to go on gut feel, other people's feedback. You're trying to get as many data points together to help you make the correct decision, whatever that may be. And a lot of the book talks about when you have sample data, the size of that data is incredibly important in being able to draw conclusions from it. Can you think of any good examples to sort of explain and relate that?
Well, I think, I think one of the good examples is from a property perspective. If you think about the prime central London property market, where you don't have that many sales going through, it's not a huge sales volume market, and for example, people derive their own conclusions from how that market's performing based on a very small sample size of transactions, which means that when the market's performing well, the world thinks that it's all going crazy, and right now we're seeing that market is not performing well. Sales are not happening. The listing prices are going down, and so everyone thinks that market's is in an absolute turmoil. And so, very much, when you have a small sample size like that, it's very difficult to it's very difficult to actually derive the truth.
Well, I think London's a great example of that. If the sample size is small, there can be a lot of this book comes back to, I think, the concept of luck.
Yeah.
If a sample size is small, it could be lucky one way or lucky the other way, unlucky or lucky, and you have to be very careful about how you interpret that, because if you're making a lot of assumptions based on what you think is real data, but is actually just statistical luck or statistical anomaly from small sample size, that can have a massive effect. One of the great examples that they took in the book, which I really enjoyed, was classroom size, where they said, okay, we did this massive study in America and we found that the top performing schools all had small classroom sizes. So we redid the education system to make small schools. And then what they also found was the bottom performing schools also had small class sizes. So they'd looked into the data and they'd found an anomaly where actually, just due to the sample size, it was all small classes, but had they done a larger study, they would have found more accurate results. And if they properly looked at the data, they would have said small classrooms have been good, but they've also been bad. So actually, there's not a clear answer that all classrooms should now be small. And when they reviewed the data more under more scrutiny, they actually found that the larger classroom size was better.
But I think a lot of that's down to biases as well. That's again another key thing that gets talked about in the book, which is, it's like the when you're given a list of we're given a list of qualities of a person. You automatically come and assume that they are a certain thing. The librarian example was the perfect one. Sort of nerdy, bookish. They don't hang out with that many people, and you think, oh yeah, this guy could be a librarian. What's the statistical probability that this guy's a librarian? And you would unfairly give them a huge weighting, where actually the number of people that probably correspond to a certain set of metrics means that they could do any number of jobs.
Yeah.
There's probably plenty of nerdy, bookish salespeople.
Yeah.
Really? Well, they probably would. Well, again, but our biases would tell us they would probably struggle.
Yeah.
But actually, maybe you actually need to analyse the data, and actually perhaps the nerdy, bookish guys can also be good salespeople, because the nerdy, bookish guy does the research.
Yeah.
They're more focused. They're not smile and dial types. They go, right, who's the decision maker? They'll go and look at the company org chart, and they'll try and find who the key people are that they need to speak to get things through.
A lot of the book is focused on the difference between System 1 thinking and System 2 thinking, and I quite like it when we look back at the example of cavemen, where it's all about fight or flight survival, and System 1 is a very, very quickly calculating machine that is looking for outcomes, and it's creating stories, and it's playing scenarios, and it's figuring out what the best decision is for survival. And System 2 is arguably the more advanced part of the brain that is really looking at calculations, computation, and logic. And a lot of what I took away from the book was the number of times that System 1 overpowers the slightly lazy, less used system 2, and it just looks for quick answers and quick solutions, and it just wants to draw conclusions. And we're very good at telling ourselves stories. So we'll take incomplete data sets and we'll create a theory around that fits our desired outcome, either looking forwards or also the narrative fallacy from the past. And we won't actually objectively look into the data because it's work. We have to think about it.
Well, it's a bit like System 1 and 2 is it's very similar to Chimp Paradox. Have you read the Chimp Paradox?
No,
you haven't.
So what's one for the list?
So there you go. Chimp Paradox is by Dr. Steve Peters, and essentially in the Chimp Paradox, Dr. Steve Peters, who is world famous psychologist, he's worked with the likes of Team Sky. I know he worked with Stephen Gerrard as well in Liverpool FC. Worked with Ronnie O'Sullivan too, amongst other people. So he's and a lot of big key athletes. I think he worked also with Jessica Ennis-Hill too, and he's one of the UK's top performance coaches, and what he is trying to do is to get you to tap into your three systems basically. So there's essentially three systems. There's the robot, there's essentially the reptile, and then you've got the chimp. And the System 1, as Daniel Kahneman explains it, is very much like the robot, which is it's a sort of the automation part of the brain. You're effectively using your subconscious. Your subconscious is effectively I called it the robot. It's the computer. That's what he called. That's what Steve Peters calls it, where everything's very automatic, and ultimately, what you want to do is you want to get when you learn something for the first time, you do something for the first time, it's very hard. When you do that multiple times and you learn how to do it, even the most complex things, that then shifts effectively from the chimp to the computer. The chimp is essentially your emotional, irrational monkey mind that ultimately has to do a lot of thought and has to work very hard just to do simple tasks for the first time, or more complex tasks for the first time. A bit like System 2. So System 2 and the chimp are quite closely related as concepts. The key thing is to use your System 2. The System 2 is the thinking, conscious mind, requires a lot of energy and thought. And really what your body wants to do, or your mind wants to do, is have everything done by System 1, so that the computer is doing all the work, because the computer can do things quickly, efficiently, and without using too much energy. And that's the key concept behind that. And that's why we do have cognitive biases, because your subconscious mind's going, well, this is the natural association I would make for this type of person or this type of situation, so that's what I'm going to go and do. And so your System 1 will always try and override System 2 where it can. System 2, for example, when you're on a diet, you engage System 2, because System 2 is the part of your brain which requires willpower. The problem is it requires a lot of energy and effort to engage System 2, and that's why if you have a bad day, or you're under a lot of stress, and you're trying to stick to a diet, it's very hard, and you most likely will relapse back to your old ways, because your System 1 has essentially said, no, I got this, you've had a tough day, go and have that donut. That's basically it. So it accounts for a lot, and that's why. But that's also why if you are trying to diet, or you're trying to change your behaviours, so at the moment I'm trying to teach myself to get up at 5:30 in the morning, because that's going to help me with productivity. The more times I do it, the more naturally ingrained it's going to become. A more natural, more System 1 focused it's going to be. It would be the same with exercise. It would be the same with diet. The more natural that becomes.
Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg.
I have read The Power of Habit. I had read The Power of Habit.
That's another. Anyone interested in this part of psychology or personal life? Power of Habit.
Yeah, effectively, the key takeaway from Power of Habit is you have an urge, you have your cue. And it's about replacing it's about replacing the bad habit with something good. So you're always going to have urges. You're always going to have cues that are going to make you want to, take action.
Yeah.
Take action. It's about replacing a bad action with a good action. So for example, if you go for a cigarette in the afternoon, are you going out? Are you going out of the building for a cigarette because you like the walk and the fresh air, or is it because you really like the nicotine? Chances are, actually, the habit that you've created is the one of going out and having the break rather than going and having the cigarette.
A lot of what I think about these type of books kind of makes me think of a Marvel quote: with "Great power comes great responsibility." You can use these principles for your own commercial benefit and gain within your own business, but you can also use them in your own life. Be that in defending yourself against other companies' marketing, because when you start to pick up on this stuff, you'll just see how ingrained it is in a lot of our society. A lot of big companies have invested a lot of money in understanding how your brain works and understanding to hack in and control it without you necessarily even thinking. I'm not a crazy conspiracy theorist. If you read the book, you will understand exactly what I mean. It's definitely worth picking up and reading.
Was it The Power of Habit or or Thinking Fast and Slow, where they talk about toothpaste?
Power of Habit.
Power of Habit.
Yeah.
So when you brush your teeth, the toothpaste manufacturers introduced a chemical compound that leaves your mouth feeling fresh and tingly. It is in fact completely irrelevant to the process of cleaning your teeth. Your teeth will be no cleaner from the tingly sensation compounds that they use to make your mouth feel like that. And the tingly sensation is purely there to keep you coming back and using that toothpaste product over and over again, because your mouth would otherwise not feel as good and as clean and cleansed. And it's the habit of doing that and using
feeling.
and that feeling that keeps you going back to the same product.
Yeah. And that's probably a routine that everyone can relate to, and if you can't, you should, of cleaning your teeth in the morning. That didn't exist 100 years ago. That was created by capitalism. They really tried to, pre-World War II, there was terrible dental hygiene. It was a big problem for armies. They were saying, well, we can't have people fit to serve if they don't have good teeth, because they get sick. How do we solve it? Tried to invent toothpaste, wasn't working, tested, came up, okay, we need to create a feedback loop here. We need to make the user feel like there's an effect with that effect, which, as you say, has nothing to do with cleaning your teeth. It's just hacking into your psychology to make you feel like you've accomplished an action, and then your body starts to crave repeating that feeling that it's done in action.
Yeah, I thought that's great. I think we've covered quite a lot of ground here, and the guys at home probably want to get on with the rest of their days. So we hope you've enjoyed the discussion that we've had here. We will do this again very soon, because Sam and I like going into small dark rooms and looking into cameras and looking like hostages in Afghanistan.
Sounds so wrong.
So we will do this again. We'll probably work out some other topics to talk about, possibly blockchain. Actually, maybe we'll talk about sales techniques as well in a bit more detail.
Yeah.
But just a final note on the power of habit and the psychology we talked about. So I've talked about, if you're looking, if you're a property developer and you want to go and get more regular introductions from the agents and brokers that that have got all the good deals. It is habitual. Those agents and those brokers pick up the phone first to the same guys over and over again, even if they're not the best buyer for a particular property. You want to shift their habits so that their first phone call is to you. And it's something that we focus on, making sure that our brokers and our developers pick up the phone first to us. And so accordingly, please do get in touch. Now, if you want to discuss any of the topics that we've discussed in the video, please feel free to comment below. Alternatively, we're very happy to talk to you on social. Sam, could you tell people your social digits?
I'm impossible to find because of my surname. If you hunt me down on Google, you'll find me Sam Zawadzki, and if you put a Z, an A, and a W, Google will find the rest for you.
Okay, you really need to think about changing your handle to like Sam Z or something like that. You can find me at property_funder. That will get you to me on both Instagram and also on Twitter. You should be able to get hold of me as well on LinkedIn. I'm linkedin.com/propertyfunder. I think that's all one word. Otherwise, look me up. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm Michael Dean, and you can go ahead and you can follow me on LinkedIn, and potentially I'll connect back with you as well. Look forward to discussing more things with you in the future. I've been Michael Dean. This is Sam Zawadzki, or Sam Zawadzki if you're in America, and we'll be speaking to you again very soon.